And I will just briefly introduce. Here with us we have Arild Eriksen. He's an architect from Oslo with many years of experience. In 2018, he started a studio called Fragment to work with different approaches on bioregional architecture based on local resources. He's also a member of numerous boards in association related to social urban development. Arild is both the author of books, a number of articles, and in 2025 he published a book with a work entitled Co-Housing Atlas. And he will give us the lecture titled Beyond the Market, Housing Alternatives for Resilient, Inclusive Oslo. So maybe we will hear more about the social aspects and housing aspects of the green ideology, let's say. So Arild, the floor is yours, and we're happy to hear your lecture.
Thank you. Like you said in introduction, I'm going to talk a bit about the little we have of housing alternatives in Oslo, which is not so much, but the nice thing is that it is a rising sort of ecosystem of people who want to do other things. And because the market is so limited, then there is a lot of people who actually works quite hard to make anything else happen. So I think it's okay for you if you stop me if there's anything unclear on the way, but I will just go through these different project examples and then we can talk a bit about it afterwards. So if Peter has seen any of my lecture before or any of your other, then of course I always start with pointing out that this kind of idea that in Norway we don't have an urban culture, that's a kind of, this is something we have been taught. And we have actually a kind of a village culture and urban culture which dates many centuries back. But at the end of the 1800s, these kind of structure were dissolved of many different reasons, mostly because of the farming and that they had a lot of different plots of land that were sort of unsuitable for farming. And then this kind of idea that Norwegians live in a small house on each their own hill sort of start to sort of grow. And we have been struggling with this kind of idea because it also says that Norwegian, they can't have co-housing, they can't live close to each other, they can't share anything, and we want to sort of combat it. And like after the First World War, also after the Second World War, there was a housing shortage, and the different labor unions in particular started to build buildings. And this is also something we talk a lot about, is that right now the housing market is completely market liberal. It means that everyone who builds to sell it on the open market. But like in 1930, the construction workers cooperative, they built the building on top left is called Etterstad Slottet. It means like a castle. And then during and just after the war, when there was a material rationing, different self-builder groups built quite large housing areas in Norway. And the one on the bottom right is like 50 buildings, and even 13 of them were actually built of earth because of the rationing of the building materials. And then you have the 70s and the 80s where there was a lot of self-building teams, architects who facilitated self-building teams, and that is not so much happening today. And today we have very little housing alternatives in Norway. I think maybe some of you have seen the different projects at Svartlamoen in Trondheim. And the picture on the top left is the experimental buildings at Svartlamoen. Like 5 families built their own small house at about 50,000 euros each to be tenants. And then you have a lot of different groups of elderly, families of disabled children who built the housing areas of different reasons. And the 2 images on the right is different groups of elderly. And for me, who is 50 years old, these groups, most of them started when they were about my age, and then the houses were finalized at about when they were 60 or maybe 70. So it is really hard to manage to develop housing in Norway outside of market, even if you have money in the bank and you have a lot of sort of capacity to work for it as well. And at the same time, there are a lot of groups in Norway who are pressured out of the city. And it means this is happening, of course, in all cities in Europe and everywhere else as well. But there has been a main focus on urban development in Oslo at what you call the fjord city for many, many years. And the fjord city has the highest square meter prices in Oslo. And in the development of the fjord city, there was a lot of like the image on the left is like an old building where there were a lot of carpenters, sound studios, artists, and that's a really nice book, but they were the groups that were pressured out when they were going to build the development on the right. And the development on the right is offices, it's also houses, and there's a lot of the Munch Museum and the National Museum, and it's ironic because artists needs to start somewhere. And the funny thing is here that they build sort of museums for appreciated art while the artists needed to move somewhere else and further outside of the city. And the rest of the urban development in Oslo is quite criticized. It's quite monotonous, and it's built basically on the basis of what the real estate agent knows sold well last year, which is like a simplification, but you can solve. There's a lot of evidence that this is sort of what the repetition sort of comes from. We've been working for many, many years to try to establish alternatives, and we've been looking, of course, at different sort of Dutch, German, Swiss alternatives. And in all our projects the last years, we implement different sort of versions of to make a structure that facilitates either self-building or either like smaller groups of developers, like groups of families who can develop housing. And the image on the left is maybe not the most beautiful area I know of, but it's Almere it's a Hamruiskwartier in Almere in Netherlands, where the municipalities make a structure and they make pipes in the ground, and you buy a plot at fixed price and you build almost anything you like. And then the landscape architects come in, or like the landscapers come and make and finalize the area. Now there is a lot of more built than what you see here. And then you have Vauban and Tübingen, which probably a lot of you know about, which is large-scale facilitation of Baugruppen, like co-builders who build together and maybe together with this kind of project manager appointed by the city and so on. And this is sort of, I always try to tell here that when we meet developers and we meet the municipality, that this has a lot of different opportunities. It feels really sort of unfamiliar to Norwegian context. And but at the same time, also when you think about the self-builder team that I showed you earlier, then you don't need to go that far back in history in Norway before actually people built a lot more themselves. And these images is like it's the Zanderroth Architekten building in a housing area in Berlin where 144 families participated with Zanderroth to make a housing area where they decided a lot for themselves. And then you have smaller versions like the Ritterstrasse 50 in Berlin, which was also partly self-built by the groups of family who moved in there. And then, of course, you have the Bell Architekten project in the International Bauausstellung in Hamburg, which is called the Grundbau und Ziele, which is the most extreme example when you buy a plot. You buy a plot of land on that kind of building you see on the bottom left, and then you got materials and you finalize your own flat with a kind of, you use a manual that Bell Architekten made as well. So these are the two, like this kind of residential planning of whole houses areas, like the Freiburg and Tübingen, and then you have the building version, which is here, where you can actually make a scaffolding and then you build a building. And we were always quite inspired by Habraken, even all the way back when I was studying at the Bergen School of Architecture on the west coast of Norway. And I think, like related to what Peter mentioned just recently, is that, of course, if you want to reuse and you want to make buildings last longer, then you need to plan the buildings to separate the different parts of it, so you can change parts that are broken or parts that needs to be adapted to new uses as well. And the Habraken model is that you have a plot and you put a house on the plot, and then you put a flat in the house, and then you put the interiors in the flat. And I think this is, and he always talked about how everything is sort of based on different levels of interaction. And the picture on the left is approximately the same, that you have a building, and where you try to separate every part of the building, that you have the system, which is the scaffold and the vertical shafts, and then you have the modules for the facade, and then you have the cladding, and then you have the infrastructure inside as well. Which is also very nice, because this is not only a sustainability, like a sustainable building model where you can change everything. It's also a way to make a structure of a building that people can participate in creating and changing over time. I was recently in Munich, and I visited a project called San Remo, which is approximately a building like this. And they, after just 2 years, they had exchanged interior spaces 3 times already. And it means you have one too many rooms, and then you talk to your neighbors, and then you go to the cooperative and they order an acoustic firewall between two flats instead, and you pay a bit less and your neighbor pay a bit more. So I think this is for in Norway, this feels like really crazy and really strange. But if you travel around in Europe, it also happens in very ordinary building and also in very innovative buildings as well. So the artist house, the Young Artists Society got in touch with us and asked us to make a new concept for artist housing in Oslo that so combined affordable housing with artist ateliers close by. And I'm not going to talk so much about the first project. This was financed by the municipal arts. I'm not necessarily know what that's called, but it's the body of the municipality who sort of facilitates artist production and artist ateliers. And we made an open building where there was a lot of self-building, and it was an open floor plan where we sort of included production spaces, community workshops, and so on. And then we made a model for both sort of flexible houses and flexible workspaces in the rest of the building. And this is also, I think it's also I think in Norway we have discovered more and more the last years that we have, because of the good economy in Norway, and this is of course valid for the rest of the Europe as well. We consume a lot of everything, and in Norway also we consume a lot of wood. We buy stuff on the internet, and all these pallets you see in this image is like from stuff you buy on the internet. We were at the recycling plant one evening, and this was just lying around there, and they picked it up, and the same amount was there the next day. At that time, we started to do a project called Cirtre Framework, Rammewerk, which was about creating an open building in wood that should be able to change over time. It could have a resident participation, and that were able to sort of include circular wooden products. It means that the same research consortium, and this was a Norwegian Research Council project, and the same research consortium, they made circular walls, they made new decks between the floors of reused wood. We had the Norwegian standardization office as well, taking part of it. And it was a massive research project with many different actors who take part. We made a more sort of elaborate and researched version of an open building. This is just a construction model from the engineers called Degree of Freedom. And they made a really simple demountable wooden construction with centralized shafts and stairs and elevators. And we made, I'm going to talk more about that later on. And this kind of structure with this kind of grid that facilitated like many different ways of making the building. And this was the idea that we made a building which is designed for reuse. It means that every element and modules we create in this building should be able to be taken out and reused in another place as well. This is how the building looked like after resident participation in also planning the windows as well. And I'm going to talk more about that later on. And I think it's interesting for me. I was educated in 2004, and that was the time where the most talked about architecture was Zaha Hadid and Delugan Maisel and all these architects who were making buildings that everything was unique and all the walls were tilting, and it was an increasing complexity of the building as well. It means like the different layers and elements were increasingly complex. And then now we see that if we're going to create housing alternatives that with a resident participation, and then we need to go back to modularity. We need to go back to this kind of good balance between a cost-effective building and maximum flexibility and participation in it as well. We used a really simple sort of grid, which is based on like different historical examples, which was possible to subdivide in different sizes. Was possible to include universal access. Was possible to include many different versions, even very small bedrooms in addition to larger bedrooms as well. And a part of this was it was a user process. We had different user groups who took part in sort of testing out different sort of elements. So this was the building in itself is a very simple building, and the main part of the process was kind of a service design of how to sort of create it together and how to choose and what the choices we're going to sort of amount to as well. And the variation of the interiors of what you could actually do with this kind of building, because every kitchen and bathroom is going to connect to the different vertical shafts, and then you have different ways of entering the building as well. During this process, of course, we were also researching access balconies, different versions of this. So this kind of idea of this open building in the Netherlands, there is an office called Mark Köhler Architects, and he has been building a vast number of open buildings of different kinds, but in concrete and steel as well. But I think for us, the main objective was to give perspectives of circular wood use as well. And also, like in this, there's a very simple way that the resident can participate to give shape to the building, is that each resident can choose windows where they're going to place the windows in their flat related to like 20% of their floor area as well, which is like a simple way of doing energy efficient housing planning as well. And this building, and we are now in the middle of meeting different developers, meeting different NGOs to sort of plan for the first building models to be sort of hopefully sort of put up in different areas of outside of Oslo and maybe in Oslo as well. And this area, of course, we are also sort of envision it in different settings as well, with urban settings and country settings as well. After doing this kind of circular building for resident participation, we started to work with this artist housing association again. I'm going to talk a bit about the mixed city afterwards. I think in Oslo, I think in it's similar to many towns in Europe and in the world, is that industry and production and repair is sort of slowly pushed out of the city. And it was like I showed earlier with this kind of artist workspaces that was in the fjord city of Oslo. This is not only happening in the fjord city, it's happening everywhere else in Oslo as well. And the Artist Association has been sort of looking at different development areas to see if it's possible to include arts production in different areas as well. Right now, at the moment, I'm also in a work group with the Norwegian trade unions, like something called LO, and another few trade unions, because they have discovered that their members, if you're a family of 2 trade workers and 2 children, you can only buy 0.8% of the houses in Oslo, which is not so much, and that means that all the trade workers slowly move out of the city, and we will have a city which is mostly houses and offices, and which I think is quite critical for a city which is going to be a sustainable and mixed city as well. We were invited to include artist housing in the development area in Oslo. And I'm not going to talk really long about this project as well, but it's just shows that in a way it's we lack in Norway, we lack non-commercial housing development. If you go to Copenhagen or Vienna or Zurich or even London, then you will find subsidized or non-commercial housing development. While in Oslo, there is actually none of it. And what we try to create is that we try to create a housing developer. In this case, develops houses for artists, but also a network of different developers for trade unions, for others who want to create houses. This is an example of an open building framework, which is, it works exactly the same as the Rammeverk building. And it's you see on this kind of diagram on the right, which is Degree of Freedom, who has made a kind of structural model for a demountable building. You could also do that with just wooden plugs as well. If you want, then you need to remove the wooden plugs in another way as well. But the main idea here is as well is that we create a grid. We base everything on modules from the building shop that we go to get building materials. You reduce the complexity of the outer walls, and then you connect bathrooms, kitchens to the vertical shafts. In this instance, we have also included sort of an outdoor access balcony, and then we have also tried to open this kind of city block with the artist to the surrounding neighborhood as well, with canteens, workshops, this kind of community building, because we also try to work a lot with co-housing features. Like Philip said, I'm working on a book for Birkhausa, which is about co-housing, and we actually try to include co-housing in all the projects that we build. Not necessarily because we want to build small buildings, but we also want to make facilities that makes it easier for people to meet their neighbors and other features as well. And like some kind of illustrations of this where you try to make this is a canteen that it's open to the artist in the workshop building, and then it's also open to the neighborhood. And here you also you can sort of imagine a bit on the bottom image what we try to do when we're doing the open buildings, that we try to detach the service facilities like the electricity and the pipes, so it's possible to change it all the time as well. And there's like the self-built workshops as well. Lastly, I'm going to talk a bit about the Omsøy and Eco Village, which is kind of another side of what we and others try to do in Oslo, which is also another story of how difficult it is to actually develop and envisioning alternative projects. The buildings that you see on the image is they have been empty for like 25 years. Some years back, a group of squatters squatted the yellow building, and they got a deal with the municipality that they could become what they call an urban ecological test area as well. It means that you are going to have a lower consumption. You're going to refurbish the building yourself. You're going to have plans for urban agriculture, waste management, water management, and different sort of ideas. And they came to us and asked if we could envision this area and these two buildings together with an kind of an old camp from the Second World War as a kind of an urban ecological sort of eco village where the residents should refurbish the buildings. We should do some kind of test buildings to facilitate self-builders. And then, of course, like I indicate on the images on the bottom, that there should be some co-housing features. It means that places for people to meet, workshops, laundry rooms as well, which I'm sure you probably have also in Croatia. I'm trying to look a bit for that now when I write the book. So if you have good sort of advices on that one, I would appreciate it as well. But in addition to that, a big part of this project have been also to make energy efficiency strategies for these old buildings, and to make different courses for the residents and others to take part in refurbishing the buildings. So we have arranged window refurbishing courses. We have had sort of Pacific oyster clay, lime plaster courses, like different sort of straw, like light clay with straw and clay courses as well, to sort of try to facilitate it. After a few years, we actually got the city council to vote for this project like 3 times. And the city council said the eco village should take over the next building, and the municipality should make it possible to happen. And years after, it hasn't still happened. And we decided to keep on working on it, but to sort of do it in another scale. And I worked with this a bit on the Oslo Architecture Triennale a few years back, and I wrote an article about how it should be possible to depart from a few existing buildings and create this kind of ecological, like urban ecological community based on that instead. We got money to do another sort of study project, and this is what you see here, is that the 2 buildings that is existing is the yellow on the left and the white on the right, and the other buildings are, it's a micro house. It means like it's 30 square meters. That's the new Norwegian technical regulation for micro house, which is clay building. And then there's a small house, the pink one. And then there's the community house as well, which is also is a rammed earth building. And then you have the green one, which is kind of open building, but is sort of adjusted to the look of the neighboring buildings, which was a really clear sort of recommendation from the municipality as well. And this is interesting. And I also think perhaps this is happening in all the other countries in Europe as well. There is a really there's really new focus on building materials, especially bio-based building materials, which I think both is very suitable for self-building. It's also can be also very short traveled as well. In this project, we have been working a bit on hempcrete, straw bale, and clay plaster and rammed earth, mostly to facilitate user participation and self-building in these processes with element building, but also to give this kind of eco village a kind of an innovative approach to new building materials as well. This is how you enter this eco building. This is like the small house. This is the community house in the end. And the nice thing about the building tradition of straw bale, rammed earth, is that there's a lot of knowledge of building physics in Norway for this. But the communities that has been building like that has been sort of marginalized for years and years, and now suddenly they are also sort of in the warmth again. I'm getting closer to the end now. I'm going to talk a bit about what I mean is a resilient city. I'm showing this image. It's just like a study we did for actually one of the few times we have been worked for a major developer here in Oslo. But we made a small housing area where we envisioned small houses together with workplaces. And I think this is something, if you go on the countryside in Norway, there's a lot of single family houses with workspaces on the first floor. But in the Oslo city center, this is not built at all. And it's basically, of course, because they build much larger in Oslo city center, but it's also because we lack different models of different versions of housing in Oslo. If you go to Berlin, you can go like 10 minutes by bus east of Warschauer Strasse, and you're still in the city center of Berlin. But they build large housing areas with just 2 or 3 stories. In Oslo, everything needs to be 6 or 7 or maybe 8 stories. And it's also kind of an ideology, I think. And I think also I'm going to jump a bit by that one. I think we have more about this sort of resiliency, and I also think that to a much larger extent, we should plan with nature and productive nature in mind when we are planning in cities. My office is also running actually an app of all things, is a mapping of what you can eat in Oslo, and is also recipes, it's maps, it's different vegetables, and it's also sort of campaigning to include eatable city nature in development areas as well, both for preparing for war and catastrophe, but also because it's a really nice thing to have in a city as meeting places as well. And at the same time, it's also in Oslo last year's school gardens, agriculture courses for children, teaching a new generation on how to grow vegetables, how to plant a microforest, how to ferment a vegetable. I think is a very important part. This is the map of this is like 2 years ago when we were starting to map the cherry trees of Oslo, the public cherry trees. And after these years, these maps have been coming increasingly crazy. Like you could even just live off making a small cherry jam factory in Oslo if you wanted. And this is also because I think if you see in Crisis, the picture on top is that the palace garden during the First World War, where they were growing potatoes in all of the palace garden. And after the World War and the First World War, the school gardens became increasingly important. And in the city today, we don't have the vegetable market, but I hope we can try to sort of include that kind of activity as well. Because then this is from a children's book we are making about foraging in the city. But it's actually, I like to show it because it shows the importance and how attractive a really sort of multifunctional, resilient city actually can be. Yes, that was it. Thank you.